everyone. Welcome back to the weekly politics show after a sort of like a long break. I'm Councillor Puru Miah with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood on Relax Radio. So we're going to do a rundown of what's been happening in terms of Tower Hamlets politics. First section, the Labour selections are over. So Labour have fielded their full squad, so to speak. On the back of that, Aspire have also fielded their full squad. So Andrew and I are going to go through a squad analysis, so to speak, with all the interesting players, the interesting background. And then moving on, we're going to talk about interesting battlegrounds in terms of the election, with particular, like, for example, the Isle of Dogs is interesting. All along the riverside, I think there's going to be some interesting battles. So Andrew and I are going to go through the key battlegrounds. And then in the third section, after the break, we're going to talk about the Spitalfields and Banglatown, Brick Lane. So it's in the news again. Andrew did a motion on the neighbourhood plan. Just get feedback from Andrew, how that went. And then a few days ago, the High Court has accepted an application for a judicial review on the controversial Truman Brewery planning application. So we're going to go do a run through that. Then after the break, we're going to discuss air taxis in Canary Wharf. So there's a possibility of an air taxi helipad or station. So Andrew and I are going to talk through that and what that means for residents in Tower Hamlets. So we're going to go straight into a break. After the break, we're going to go straight into squad analysis, Labour versus Aspire. Hi everyone, welcome back to the weekly politics show. I'm Councillor Puru Miah with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood on Relax Radio. So in this section, we're going to talk. A lot of things have happened during the Christmas break. The Labour selections are over. Plenty of blood on the floor, I think, so to speak. Plenty of blood that's been spilled. Plenty of casualties. Interesting results. So Labour have fielded their full squad, so to speak, and off the back of that, Aspire have fielded their full squad. So and Andrew's got the full list of that as well. So let's run through Labour first. So I'm just going to give background to viewers and listeners. So the Labour Party has an internal primary selection process. So it's a democratic process where members get to choose who their council candidates. It's quite a new tradition in Tower Hamlets. So for 24 years, they didn't have any primaries. It was the party leader who selected the squad, so to speak. But after a campaign, 2017 was the first set of member selections, they're called, and they carried on with the tradition in 2021. And interesting results, Andrew. I think the first shock for me was Councillor James King, who is a good friend, and we have stood together on certain issues. Him being knocked out on a really weird result. So I think 11 people turned up to the selection. It just shows how these things could be really topsy-turvy. Yeah. And I think he lost by a single vote to a complete someone who's not known in the area. He's a Labour Party activist. I think he was active in Stepney Green and then in Spitalfields, so not in the Limehouse area. He's not active, and he won the selection. So that was sort of like the shock. That was a shock for me. The other shock result is also Councillor Tariq Khan being deselected. Tariq and I, we started politics together in 2016. I still remember it like yesterday, the meeting in the CAF where we had this vision of changing Tower Hamlets. I walked away and Tariq unfortunately got pulled up against the wall and and got deselected. So that's those are the two shock results for me. Although you had Labour councillors deselected in certain wards, they found places in other wards. So, for example, Zenith Rahman, who's in Bromley North, got selected in Poplar. Asma Islam deselected in Mile End, got selected in Weavers, and then Victoria Bazi deselected in Whitechapel, but got selected in Shadwell. So, my reckoning, I think 2 Labour councillors got deselected. Is that correct?
So I've done a spreadsheet, as I always do for these things. So of the 40 Labour councillors today, 18 no change. 4 of them are moving wards, as you were just talking about, and then sort of 18 of them are either retiring or plan to retire, like yourself, or were not reselected. So that's again a big change, and also a lot of. And I remember saying this 4 years ago. One of my concerns then was, we're losing a lot of very experienced people. So we're losing people like Candida Ronald, Danny Hassel. These are people with a lot of experience. So that does mean there's going to be a lot of new people, whether they're Labour candidates or Aspire or other parties. We'll find out in May.
But there's also been some like retreads as well. So Mizan Chowdhury, who's a former councillor, got selected. The interesting one for me is a Councillor Abdul Shakur, who's, I think he started his career in the 80s, and he was there during the ups and downs, so to speak, of the Labour administration. He was a key figure in the Professor Michael Keefe era. So Professor Michael Keefe and Abdul Shakur were councillors in Shadwell together, and now he's back. And I've spoken to Councillor Shakur, and he has ideas, so to speak. I don't know how favourable those ideas are with the current mayor, but he did make it clear that he will forward those ideas forcefully. But he's an experienced councillor, controversial as well, but he's experienced, and that's going to be an interesting battle. But in terms of Aspire, have you found any interesting candidates in their squad, so to speak?
Yeah, so they've got a full slate of 45 candidates. I think 5 of them are former councillors. Well, 2 of them obviously are current councillors, so Kabir Ahmed, for example, and Haroon Amir and Shadwell, and then 3 others who were councillors in previous years, like Owed Ahmed, as example, and Maya Mir in Canary Wharf ward. So again, with Aspire, there is some experience within that group, but again, predominantly sort of new people. And most of these people, I don't recognise their names. But they may be well known within their own communities, but as I said, I don't know most of them. And the other thing that has attracted comment is that out of the 45, 44 are male, and 1's a female in Limehouse, which will make Limehouse an even more interesting competition than it already was. But yes, perhaps not the most representative group in Tower Hamlets either.
Yeah, I was a bit shocked by that, because just from campaigning experience, having a female candidate actually adds strength to the team. So a lot of, when I've been door knocking, a lot of female residents are uncomfortable talking about certain issues. They feel much more comfortable talking to a female, and I just find it bizarre, so to speak, why that hasn't been, because every time I sort of observed, it's the female candidates in the team who are the strongest, who pull the team through. So I just find that bizarre, but they might have a different electoral strategy from the one I'm used to, but I find that bizarre. The interesting one for me is a Mile End, where I've got Azad Mir, who was the former chair of the Mile End Labour Party and was a treasurer for Poplar and Limehouse CLP. he sort of like jumped to the other side and is up against the current chair of the Myland, who we went head to head on an AGM. So it's the battle of the two chairs, Lilu Ahmed and Azad Mir in Myland. One's a former chair and the other one's a current chair. So it might seem it's for me it might be an internal Labour battle that's being played out on the streets of Myland, but so that's an interesting candidate. I think Mayum coming back is interesting. He's got very strong presence on the Isle of Dogs. He does do a lot of activities.
Yeah.
So he's a force to be reckoned with. And then they got Saluk, who's a former councillor in Spitalfields. He's back, and that makes Spitalfields an interesting battleground. But it is a fairly inexperienced team, so to speak. But then, but then again, we have an executive mayoralty there. But then the other interesting figure is Iqbal Hussein, I think, who's in Lansbury, again a former secretary of the Labour Party. He has a lot of friends in the local Labour Party in Lansbury, so that's going to be an interesting contest in Lansbury. So again, sort of like it's sort of interesting. But just moving on, I think the Lib Dems are fielding sort of like they're not fielding a strong team all over the borough, but they got target seats. So Wapping is a target seat. From what I've heard, they fielded really strong candidates there. Yeah. They've been campaigning quite extensively. They've even got volunteers coming in from south of the river to campaign in Wapping. The other place where they fielded strong candidates is in Whitechapel. So they got Aminur Khan and Assad, who were the former councillors in Whitechapel. And so, like, being the secretary there, I've seen the leaflets. They've already leafleted all the houses, so people are aware. So they're fielding sort of like a target. And the other sort of like the submarine to watch out for is Aziz Khan in Blackwell. So just to give, so I was a bit surprised to see Aziz Khan is a former Liberal councillor who was in Bethnal Green, part of the Liberal administration. He's come back to the Lib Dems, and he's on the island. He's on the prowl on the island, so he is someone not to be underestimated. So he's someone to watch out for. What about I haven't been following the Conservatives. Have they fielded their full candidates, Andrew?
So in terms of the Conservatives, so I don't know the full story. What they have done is picked candidates on the Isle of Dogs, because traditionally that's been the strongest Conservative base. So they've definitely got candidates there, and definitely in St Catherine's and Wapping and in Limehouse, because, as I said, these are all potentially areas where the Conservatives could win. But I haven't heard anything about any of the other wards. So a little bit like the Liberal Democrats, they will be focusing on just a handful of wards across Tower Hamlets. And as far as I know, they haven't picked a mayoral candidate yet either. So they're also behind on that process as well.
Well, I think the interesting candidate I found Lib Dems is is it D'Souza, the lady who stood last time in Blackwell and Cubic Town, who's been
the Conservative,
D'Souza, So I find her a strong candidate. She's been campaigning consistently on social media. She does run a Facebook concentrating on ASB and crime in the area. So that's the interesting candidate, because it's just the method of deep organizing. So like picking candidates a long time beforehand and then allowing them to embed themselves in the local community a totally different approach from the Labour Party here in Tower Hamlets. Traditionally, Labour Party elsewhere, they pick their candidates about a year ahead, allowing the candidates to embed themselves in the local area. For whatever reason, in Tower Hamlets, we're near the end of the line. For me, I just don't understand that logic, but it is. But what that means is the candidates are thrown in. A lot of them don't even know the areas.
Yeah.
And it's just up against time. I've been advising new candidates, and I said, look, you don't have enough time. You just have to, we don't have the luxury of voter registration. You don't have the luxury of going and registering. You just have to look at the data, look at who votes consistently, and you just have to do a targeted campaign because you just don't have the time to run a proper campaign. But that is, we're going to go straight into a break. After the break, we're going to look at interesting battlegrounds, including Andrew's Canary Wharf. So after the break, it's a Mexican standoff, as far as I understand. But we're going to go straight into a break. After the break, we're going to look at interesting battlegrounds. Hi everyone, welcome back to the weekly politics show. I'm Councillor Puru Miah with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood on Relax Radio. So in this section, we're going to talk about interesting battlegrounds. So you got the candidates fielded. Tower Hamlets isn't homogenous, as you can see from the way our previous discussion about the Lib Dems and the Conservatives focusing their resources in certain parts of the borough, which creates an interesting battleground. And the first one for me is interesting is Canary Wharf, Andrew, your stomping ground, because you've got Mayum's back. I was under the impression that he would stand in Blackwall, where he lives. That was my sort of like logic, so to speak. But no, Mayum's coming back into Canary Wharf, and yourself there. Got Conservatives are fielding. Is it Samir Hersey?
Samir Hersey.
Samir Hersey, who's been quite active campaigning, and then you've got Adam Allnut from the Labour Party, who is quite an effective campaigner. Has been sort of like active locally. Yeah. Adam did try to tilt on the ward in 2018, didn't get through in the selections. Got through now, so it's going to be a really hard battleground in the sense you've got four strong candidates, but 2 seats. So it's going to be really interesting with how the votes pan out. I think the voters of Canary Wharf are quite spoilt for choice. Yeah. Andrew, what's your analysis? You're on the thick of it, so to speak, in this sort of like game of death in Canary Wharf.
No, so I think you're right. It is going to be one of the most competitive wards because it's also a ward where 3 different political parties have won in the last 2 sets of elections. So mine won it for Aspire in 2014. He also won it for the Conservatives in 2010, but no more on that. But the Conservatives have won it twice with me as one of the candidates in the past for the Conservatives. And the Labour have also won it with Kirsten Perry winning in 2018. And in 2018, there was a 7-vote difference between the 2nd, 3rd and 4th candidates, the 2 Labour and 1 Conservative. So, yes, it is a very competitive ward. And I'm an independent, won't have any party support and all the rest of it. So that will also add something new to the mixture as well. And, it'll be a test of whether people vote for people they know or whether they will vote for the parties that they normally vote for.
So that's interesting. And it's interesting in the sense that there's been a lot of change in your ward as well. So a lot of new buildings coming up, a lot of residents people haven't been in touch with. one of the things I've noticed is there's been a shift. So because private developers have to build social housing, you have families moving in from other parts of the borough there, which creates its own dynamics, which I find interesting. So it's interesting. The other key battleground I find interesting is Wapping, which is again is a sort of like a three-way Mexican standoff. You've got, I think, the Conservatives are fielding they traditionally fielded strong candidates there, and that it was held previously by a Conservative councillor. You got the Lib Dems fielding a strong team, and then obviously you got Labour with Abdal Ullah, who's an experienced councillor. So it's going to be an interesting battleground, especially with the Lib Dems pouring huge amounts of resources in to that. Any observations on the Wapping?
So Wapping, interestingly enough, has one of the highest percentages of graduates of any ward in the whole country, even higher than you might think of places like Oxford and Cambridge. So from memory, I think it's over 60%, and that's a group where the Liberal Democrats have done well with in the past. But like a lot of the wards, the key will be voter turnout, because a lot of the graduates tend not to vote. But if the Liberal Democrats can get those people out, then yes, they will be very competitive in that ward. So, for example, Neil King is standing for the Conservatives, and he's fought that for many years. And the Conservatives had it for about 10 years up until 2018. So they will definitely feel that they can win that. But how the vote then splits, and the other issue for the Conservatives will be the Boris impact. You know, a lot of people are very upset with Boris Johnson, and will that rub off on local candidates? I think it would be unfair, because local issues are very different from national issues, but it might have an impact, because it always does to some extent.
And then the other interesting battleground again is on the island is Blackwall and Cubic Town, which is sort of like a three-way sort of like standoff. Aspire haven't put in any strong candidates there, from my understanding. It's between the Conservatives, Labour, and the Lib Dems who've done quite well there, despite not campaigning. And again, with the Labour team, you've got existing Councillor Papu there with the two new candidates. Got Asra Anjum, who lives locally and is the secretary of the CLP. And then the other interesting candidate is Chris Worrell, so like an interesting character in the Labour Party, quite active on social media, trolling people. He doesn't troll me. We do sort of like shake hands and smile, and we do get along privately, but not in terms of politics. So Chris describes himself as a YIMBY. He's pro development, pro skyscrapers. I think he came to one of the planning meetings, and I think 101. I think Whitechapel, the controversial one. Chris was arguing, and he was upset when his Labour councillors voted against it. But he is a very strong campaigner. Chris is, and so it is going to be an interesting battleground. And then the other one, which is sort of like another game of death, is Whitechapel, where you've got a sort of like a three-way contest between Labour, the Lib Dems, and Aspire. So Aspire fielding Shafi, who was the previous councillor, who won in a surprise by-election against Labour. Then you got the Lib Dems fielding Aminu Khan and Councillor Assad, former Councillor Assad. They were the previous councillors for the ward. They lost in 2018, so they're coming back. And then you got the two incumbent Labour councillors plus a new candidate, Farhana Zaman, for Labour. And so it's going to be a three-way battle. And the rumours are that Shahid Ali, who was the former councillor for Whitechapel, is going to stand as an independent.
Okay.
So he's going to stand as an independent. He just is. So it's gonna it's you just don't know which way things are gonna go, with Shahid Ali in the mix in the background lurking away.
At least it'll be fun. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So Labour are launching the campaign tomorrow. So it's going to be a fun place. Any other, so like all of those are sort of like along the riverside, so to speak.
Well, so adding to that, Limehouse will be interesting, I think, because I was, as you said, I was very surprised with James King being deselected. I wasn't expecting that at all, and my assumption was that he was going to win again because he's done a decent job and he's been a good councillor. But with him going and this new candidate, I think David Garside for the Conservatives will be hopeful because he's very well known locally. And also with a female Aspire candidate, that could also make things interesting against an all-male opposition. And then in Island Gardens, on the Isle of Dogs, you've got Councillor Peter Gold and Councillor Mafida Buston kind of competing, and they'll both have their sort of runners up. I think Mafida may be vulnerable. I heard that she only barely scraped through the reselection process, so that may also be a very interesting competition as well in Island Gardens. But I think and then sort of going up North Weavers, because Kabir Ahmed only just won that seat a little while ago. Yes, I think that will be an interesting competition as well in Weavers wards. So the only areas where I expect pretty much Labour dominance is Bow East and Bow West, because it's basically the existing team who are standing again, very strong, very good candidates. So I think Labour are pretty safe up there, but in some of the other wards, I think it will be a very interesting competition.
I think the other issue is the livable streets effect. So I'm hearing sort of like chatter in St. Peter's ward. I think they've renamed it. Is it Bethnal Green West
or East? I still got the two confused.
Yeah.
What's even more confusing is that even though the council internally have changed everything, the Bethnal Green East and West, the councillors on their Twitter feeds, for example, still use the old names. So that transition hasn't been managed very well.
So we'll go with St. Peter's for now, and until we get the memo. So St. Peter's is interesting in the sense that I was talking to Labour Party members there. They do think that livable streets is going to have a massive impact.
Yeah.
So they're kind of nervous on that, especially with sort of like the two Aspire candidates that being fielded. So the way the ward works is there's a big, massive estate, the Collingwood estate on the south side, and both of those Aspire candidates come from that estate. So they more or less, have a lockdown, so to speak. And then because of the livable streets on the north part of the ward, there's discontent. It's sort of like gives them the avenue to grab those votes at that end, which makes it very difficult for Labour, so to speak. I think Kevin Brady is a very strong campaigner. Kevin's been running a strategy, just looking at it, of sort of like going into the Green vote. So there is a very strong Green vote at the north, where I think there's a housing co-op along the canal. So I think Kevin's sort of like as an existing councillor has been using that strategy, and the other new candidate, Kevin McKenna, in Weavers, has been adopting that same strategy as well in terms of his local campaign of reaching out to the Green votes. So that's why both of them have taken a very strong view on livable streets, pro low traffic neighborhoods, against the grain. And it'd be interesting to see whether that approach works out electorally, so to speak, that you can have discontent in your sort of like core vote in exchange for sort of like votes from the Greens. See whether that pans out. Any other observations, Andrew?
No, so I mean, in terms of that Green vote, so my understanding, not confirmed, is that the Green Party won't be standing a mayoral candidate on the basis that basically they want John Biggs to get re-elected. So the question will be is whether the Green Party stand candidates in all of the wards, because as you just said, in that ward, the Green Party did very well in 2018. I think they've got about 700-800 votes. So they're definitely, if they don't stand, that would help probably the Labour Party. So that would be interesting to see what the Green Party kind of do as a result, and whether they stand in all of the wards like they didn't do it entirely in 2018, but they did stand in lots of wards then and did well.
Yeah. So that it's interesting. So this isn't the end of it's a sort of like a running commentary from me and Andrew. It's going to be an interesting election campaign. So this is the kickoff, so to speak. So anything interesting happens on the campaign, we'll endeavour to be the first to give you the analysis. But all the way through to May is going to be an interesting campaign. But we're gonna go straight into a break. After the break, we're gonna discuss the Spitalfields of Banglatown, the Brick Lane area. Two interesting developments. There was a debate on the neighbourhood plan. Andrew put forward a motion, and then the High Court has accepted an application to overturn the controversial Truman Brewery planning decision. So we're going to go straight into a break. After the break, we're going to go into sort of like Spitalfields and Banglatown neighbourhood plan and the Truman Brewery judicial review. Hi everyone, welcome back to the weekly politics show. I'm Councillor Puru Miah with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. So in this section, we're going to talk about the recent developments in the Spitalfields and Banglatown area, known widely as the Brick Lane area. It has the iconic Brick Lane, but it also has sort of like the historic Spitalfields area. Two interesting developments. One is there was a debate at full council, Andrew, I believe, on the neighbourhood plan, which you put forward a motion. So if a motion is put forward, there's a debate. So Andrew, you want to just run us through your motion and what it was asking for and the background to it and what the response was?
So the background was on Thursday, 11th of November, there was a referendum in Spitalfields. I think we've talked about this before. And because it was a neighbourhood plan area that has lots of businesses as well as residents, there were two votes on the day. There was a business vote and a residents vote. And the problem was the residents voted yes, but the businesses voted no. So in these circumstances, basically the decision is up to the council or councillors to decide. So in effect, councillors have to decide whether they go with the resident yes vote or the business no vote. And the problem is that Tower Hamlets Council appears, or at least officers, basically don't want to make a decision. So what they seem to be wanting to do is they're asking the forum to talk to their opponents to agree, some kind of compromise. The problem with that is because the whole process is bound by law and statute, is that the more changes you make, the more likely you have to go to repeat the whole process again. So if you make material changes to the neighbourhood plan, you actually have to restart the consultation, restart the independent examination and have another referendum, which means the whole thing gets delayed probably by a year. And the problem is that nobody's had to deal with this problem before in the United Kingdom, because this is the first time where there's been that split vote and where businesses have actually voted no. So Tower Hamlets Council are trying to have to figure out for the first time how to deal with this. Basically, they don't want to take a decision. And one of the reasons for that is that they're worried about a legal challenge either from the Neighbourhood Planning Forum or from the businesses. But the problem that we have, and I'll say it now because Councillor Peter Golds did talk about it, is actually there is an active police investigation underway right now into the referendum over some issues related to voting. And one of the other issues, and this is from looking at the marked register, which I've been doing, is half of the business votes, 49.5% of them, come from one building in the area. And it's a certain type of business. I'm not going to say which business it is. I think, we have talked about this before. But my argument is actually the business vote is not representative of the wider business community, and therefore we can ignore that and go with the resident vote. So what the motion was about was just kind of going through some of the background, going through why perhaps this one business were opposed to the neighbourhood plan, because there's a policy that basically increases or reduces the price for some of the office space with any new development, because Tower Hamlets Council have this policy that 10% of any new office space should have reduced rents, and the neighbourhood plan kind of took that one step further in terms of the reduction in rents. And the other thing that we were concerned about is, I think, some councillors making decisions based on personal issues or personal opinions about people involved in neighbourhood planning forum rather than on the policies. So we were worried about that. So in the motion is a section talking about the risk of legal challenge, and basically the motion at the very end basically sort of asked the council that this council condemn any abuse of the Spitalfields neighbourhood plan referendum. That's all the motion was asking for. And Councillor Peter Golds and myself obviously made those arguments, but the Labour group decided to vote against it, to vote no, and their argument on the night, that was the only way of actually sort of, in effect, kicking this into long grass, to delay any actual decision, even though the only thing we were asking for was a condemnation, and was to condemn any abuse of the neighbourhood plan referendum process. The Aspire Party supported this motion, so they agreed to condemn any abuse of the Spitalfields neighbourhood plan. But the Labour group decided not to do that. And one of the problems now is that this whole mess, because it is a mess, is just going to carry on and on and on. Because yes, there will be talks between the Neighbourhood Planning Forum and their opponents. And I think on some things, things like to do with name changes, maybe changing it to Spitalfields and Banglatown, that's easy, doesn't require a new referendum. But I think some of the other policies, which the parts of the business community were opposed to, you're not going to resolve that easily. So this is going to be a poison chalice, which means that whoever gets elected in May, one of the things they're going to have to deal with is a decision on what to do with the Spitalfields neighbourhood planning referendum results. And it's also not good because it also means any planning applications which come forward in this area, there will be this degree of uncertainty about the weight to give the neighbourhood plan. It will still carry a lot of weight based on government guidance, but developers will also be able to say, well, there's a split vote and it hasn't been approved by the council yet, and therefore we should give it reduced weight as compared to the council actually last week voting yes for this. And as a result, we've had to do lots of work. There's a letter going into Michael Gove, the Secretary of State, just to make him aware of some of these problems, because the other part of the problem has been is I don't think anybody in government foresaw the kind of difficulties that we've now got. So therefore, some of the regulations and the guidance is not strong enough. So we're going to have to write to the government and to say, are you aware of these problems? And you're going to need to tighten up some of the regulations. So a good example of that is there's a spending limit. You're not allowed to spend more than £2,800 during the referendum process. But we think the anti-campaign spent a lot more than that. But there's no mechanism that requires them to report their spending. So there's a rule that says you can't spend more than £2,800, but there's no mechanism for them to actually report what they actually did spend. So that's why government are going to have to change the rules on some of this stuff.
Well, following this uncertainty on the neighbourhood plan is the acceptance of the application for judicial review of the Truman Brewery, controversial planning application to overturn it. again, there is the impact of the neighbourhood plan, because part of the argument is that they didn't consider the neighbourhood plan. Although I think people, decision makers, have to give weight to the neighbourhood plan as if it's passed until the referendum result is until it's adopted. I think once it's put forward, that's what the advice was from the planning officers. So again, it seems like the issues around Brick Lane or the city fringe in general is going to become an election issue. What that means is the campaigners will be campaigning to raise the necessary funds. So one of the issues that came up was that Tower Hamlets Council has asked for a £40,000 cap on costs. So the campaigners have to have £40,000 ready, so to speak, and usually it's a £10,000 cap. So the campaigners feel that's maliciously done by Tower Hamlets Council, or pressure being put on by Tower Hamlets Council by the Truman Brewery to prevent them from going ahead with the court case. But they're determined to raise the necessary funds to actually see it through. So it's gonna rumble on. The other issue is talking to the campaigners. They're interested in doing a hustings on the a mayoral hustings, just to talk about the issue. So you've got this live issue of a judicial review. You've got the neighbourhood plan, which is another live issue. But then you've got a wider issue of how we do regeneration in inner city London, because a lot of people feel that the current approach adopted by Tower Hamlets Council, which is pro development, is, I wouldn't say it's pro development, I would say it's pro developer, not development, where the developer shoves all the costs onto everybody else is not working, and people are looking for an alternative. And you're facing those same issues on the island as well, and it might be the issue in the election. I know the Labour administration wasn't happy with the High Court's decision to accept the application, but yeah, look, we have an independent judiciary, guys. So get with it.
This makes the whole environment messy, even more messy than it already is. And I think, part of the problem with the council's view on development, especially for Brick Lane, is it sort of sees it almost purely in economic terms. And obviously the economy is very important and jobs are very important, but there's a wider debate to be had. And we haven't really had those debates, and in part because I've had to spend lots of time, looking at the marked register for the business vote and sort of working out who did what vote, which is not a productive use of time. And then having to produce this motion is not productive, because it's not moving forward or having the arguments about what should the future of Brick Lane actually be. And we do need to have that, and maybe the mayoral process is one way of doing that. But yeah, when the Isle of Dogs has lots of issues, the big issue we've now got is kind of fire safety issues. So all of these tall buildings with single staircases. So that's the big issue on the island right now, plus a bunch of other things. So
I was quite surprised that the Labour group decided to vote down your motion. Normally they put an amendment on these things. Were there any discussions? Did they try to discuss it with you, or was it just you were just told they're going to vote against it on the day?
Only in the debate did we find out that's what they're planning to do. And there was no amendments, which actually made us think that they might, because we very deliberately, all we were asking for them to do was to condemn any abuse of the neighbourhood plan process. Nothing beyond that. So we thought that was a pretty simple ask. But I think because the council decided they don't want to make any decisions right now, therefore no vote in effect was the same as not making a decision on this. But that does mean that, yes, it will just drag on and be another distraction like a lot of other things, which doesn't allow us to move on. So,
well, it is going to, it might be the issue of the election. I know the campaign is, we need to raise the money to take Tower Hamlets Council to court. But So it's going to be there. They're not the campaign's not going away, and the issue's not going away. Contrary to the wishes of the current administration, we're going to go straight into a break. After the break, we're going to discuss a sort of like potential helipad for air taxis on the in Canary Wharf. So Andrew and I are going to have a discussion on this sort of like a vision of the future of how public transport could be in Tower Hamlets. So we're going to go straight into a break. After the break, air taxis in Canary Wharf. Hi everyone, welcome back to the weekly politics show. I'm Councillor Puru Miah with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood on Relax Radio. So in this final section, we're going to sort of have a light discussion, a difference from the heavy discussion we've had on the issue of a potential helipad on the Isle of Dogs in Canary Wharf to facilitate air taxis. So this is something that you've picked up, Andrew, and I've read it sort of like a few weeks ago on a British company getting a massive contract to supply Japan with air taxis, and it seems like that is the future. And recently there was news about sort of like air lithium batteries, so they got their battery densities much higher, which allows long distance air travel, potentially could allow long distance air travels and quieter air travel. So Andrew, fill us in on the details. Are we gonna have this sort of like futuristic helipad in Canary Wharf, and are we gonna have sort of like all these air taxis in the air?
So this helipad, I actually live next to it, so obviously I have a sort of personal interest in this as well. So there is actually been for about 40 years now actual helipad with normal helicopters operating from it. Not that many. So a lot of people actually don't realize it's there. But a new operator has taken over the lease, and it's a company called skyports.net. And they describe themselves as a mobility company developing and operating landing infrastructure for the electric air taxi revolution. So the new thing, and we don't have them yet in the UK, because they're still being developed, is this idea of kind of electric air taxis. It's sometimes called eVTOL. So basically, it's like a helicopter, but battery powered only. And they normally have lots of kind of rotors. And sort of the big difference with helicopters today is, in theory, they'd be much cheaper to operate. And in theory, and there's some arguments about this, and we need to find out whether this is true or not, in theory, much quieter. But if you look at other countries, so to Dubai and Singapore, for example, they seem to be really keen on this idea of basically having a new form of transport. So this wouldn't be necessarily for short journeys. So this wouldn't replace the bus network or the underground network in London, but for kind of perhaps longer distance journeys that perhaps you might use trains for today or cars, is that you actually might use these electric air taxis. So for example, there's another British company called Vertical Aerospace, and on their website, they actually say to get from Canary Wharf to Heathrow Airport would be 13 minutes flying time. If I wanted to make that journey today by public transport, that's like 1 hour and 19 minutes by comparison. So obviously it's going to cost more, electric air taxis. How much we don't know yet, but there is a real potential. And I know people have been talking about this for decades. So this kind of promise of kind of like, of air taxis has been something that people have been talking about for decades. But what is really interesting is that there are just so many companies out there, and there's a lot of money being invested in this idea, and lots of companies really active in this idea. So it is entirely possible that from around 2025, that we could have operating from the Isle of Dogs this electric air taxi service. And then if it were to work, where else in Tower Hamlets would you then put these landing pads? So it's entirely possible that other parts of Tower Hamlets that we might need to be building at some point in the future, these electric air taxis, so that people can get to the airport or go to Cambridge or wherever that they want to go to, because actually it's competitive to do so from a price point of view. And because they are electric, you don't kind of have the same noise and pollution issues that you've got with helicopters today. But there's so many things still needing to be done in terms of regulation. So the UK, even if the technology was ready today, and it's still, a lot of these things are still in development, is kind of how this would work, how you'd control airspace, insurance, all of that kind of stuff is still completely up in the air. But this company has bought the heliport, or at least the lease here, to start gaining some operational experience of what it's like to run normal helicopters here, because that hopefully in 3 years' time, when they start running the electric air taxi service, they have some experience of how to do that. So potentially, this could dramatically change transport options in Tower Hamlets in the next 5 to 10 years, but we'll see. But yes, it could be very exciting if the technology works as advertised.
Well, my understanding is it's targeted at the business traveler. So just looking at the contract that was the British company got for Japan, the idea is that as a business traveler, you just get off the airport, instead of sort of like using public transport, you just get onto the air taxi and it'll take you to your desired business location, and that's the kind of convenience. So the idea was the hubs were going to be around the airport, and then you have various hubs in various business districts. So Canary Wharf there's a logic behind having one in Canary Wharf, in the sense that you could envision someone landing in Heathrow, going through passport control and everything, and then straight into an air taxi, and within half an hour they're there for a business meeting, and then back again, so to speak, back on the flight. So it'll just create interesting dynamics, and you're going to need the infrastructure as well to build around that, which again interesting. And off the back of sort of like transport in the Isle of Dogs, Canary Wharf, the new station's been handed over. So again, that's going to have an interesting impact in terms of connectivity. So again, it's sort of like we just don't know what the long-term impacts are going to be. And Andrew, is this something that, so you've done the sort of like the local plan in terms of the Isle of Dogs? Is this something that you sort of like thought about, or had discussed about, like the impact of future transport or etc., and how that impacts on the residents' quality of life?
Yes, I mean, that's a good question. So in terms of the current Tower Hamlets Council local plan, I'm not sure it even has the word helicopter in there, even though there is an existing helicopter pad here. Same with the transport documents. It's like invisible, because I think actually a lot of council officers are not even aware that there has actually been a helipad operating since the year 1980. So, if this is going to sort of become, one of the future modes of public transport, because if you think about, like a train journey from here to Oxford on a Monday morning is not cheap. So it may well be that actually an air taxi is competitive. And the other point to make is that because of the battery technology, these are not going to be really long distance journeys that they can do. So we are talking about relatively short journeys within the southeast of England that they can do. So yes, mainly to airports, but also potentially to other towns. But who knows how this might develop? We haven't had any really big changes in kind of transport technology for, the bus has been around for 100 years. Underground trains have been around for 100 years. The only really new thing are like electric scooters, but they're kind of a little bit like bicycles in terms of their impact. So potentially this could be revolutionary. So that's one of the things that politicians and planners are going to have to start thinking about, is if this does take off in the next 10 years, how do we adapt to it? So, for example, in Sao Paulo, Brazil, a lot of the tall buildings have on their roof helicopter landing platforms like we have at the Royal London Hospital. Do we do the same here? Or do we sort of, I don't know, because nobody's had those kind of conversations yet. But, if we do write a local plan or a new one, because the council have, I think, set aside some money to start writing a new one, is a time period when that's operational will be the time period when this technology, hopefully around 2025, will become functional and will start working. So we're going to have to start thinking about these issues. And the same for the Mayor of London. The Mayor of London is going to have to start thinking about this issue as well.
Is this something that you're going to incorporate in your manifesto or talk about in your manifesto? So, Andrew, my understanding is, as part of your mayoral bid, you're developing your manifesto. You've asked people for ideas, just to understand what the issues are. How is this something you're going to incorporate, and how's this process of sort of like a collective manifesto coming along? Just to give us an update.
Yeah, so it's sort of so I'm mainly for now using Facebook because that's the main tool I've got. So I set up a new Facebook group called A Vision for Tower Hamlets, and basically what I'm doing, and other people can join in this as well, is I kind of post a question. So, for example, this morning it was a question about e-scooters, which is the other new technology for transport, and how that might work. The mayor of Tower Hamlets wouldn't have control about whether to legalize them or not. But there's things that we could do locally. So, for example, if they are legalized, I've seen in the City of London, they've set aside like special parking bays for e-scooters. Do we do that as well? So do we go around Tower Hamlets and sort of saying, rather than just park these electric scooters, these rental ones, wherever you want, actually we're going to encourage you to park them in these kind of set aside places. Do we actually build more cycle lanes? Because my view of cycle lanes is I have doubts whether enough people are going to cycle to justify their usage. But that could dramatically change if there's lots of, if e-scooters become legal, then actually we could see lots of cyclists and e-scooter riders using these new lanes, which might therefore justify the kind of, setting aside space for them. I don't know. And those are the kind of questions that we're talking about on Facebook, and will be part of the campaign, because what we'll be trying to do is writing a manifesto that either asks these questions or comes up with solutions, or says how the next mayor of Tower Hamlets should deal with some of this stuff. And electric air taxis will be one of the subjects within it. And I think broadly I'm supportive of it, but we do need to check some of the claims made about noise in particular, and some of the safety issues as well, as to how that might work in the first 5 years. And one of the reasons why it's here is because helicopters use the River Thames as a kind of transport route. So if the helicopter has a problem, it goes into the river, which is not great for the people in the helicopter, but at least it means that nobody on the ground gets hit. So how will that work in the future?
Well, have you got a time frame as to when you'll publish your manifesto, or at least the main ideas? Do you have a timetable in mind, Andrew?
Yes, I think so. So the rough ideas I will. So these conversations are happening every day. So tomorrow morning I'll put more stuff on Facebook. But I wrote a list of all of the issues to cover, and it's a very long list. And I forgot dogs. I forgot to write something about dogs, and then I thought mold. Mold is a big problem right now this winter. What can the council do to help? There's not really much information, so I need to put. So this process will take time. So I think roughly our idea is to sort of finish that first draft in February, and then see what people think about it, and then have conversations about it, and then fine tune it in March, with the objective that a month before the elections on the 5th of May, that there is a pretty much final manifesto for people to look at. And then say whether they like it or not. And then the idea is, if they like those ideas, and you vote for me, because that's how you encourage everybody else to adopt those ideas. If I get elected as mayor, then I will enact those ideas. If I don't get elected but get lots of votes, and hopefully that will encourage whoever the next mayor is, sort of say, well, Andrew got X number of votes with these ideas. Maybe I should have a look and borrow some of them.
Understood. Well, we're looking forward to the debate, so to speak, and any contribution is welcome in terms of providing relief from what we have currently. So we're coming to the end of the show. Is there anything viewers and listeners should watch out for in the coming week, Andrew?
So, I mean, the big issue in the next sort of month, other than the elections, is the budget process. So next week, we'll see that the capital budget, which hasn't been published yet. So that's normally for 3 years. So that'll be very interesting to give us a clue, for example, on St George's Baths. If the council is serious about rebuilding that, then there will be some money set aside in that capital budget. So if it's not in there, that will also be a clue as to what the council are thinking about some of those big issues in terms of capital spend.
Cool. Well, thank you everyone for watching the weekly politics show. We're slightly overrunning, but thank you again. So I'm Councillor Puru Miah with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.